Welcome back to Natural 2, our weekly D&D and tabletop role-playing podcast, talk show, advice thing that we do. And I am Nathan. My co-host, as always, is James. And today we are discussing what we are calling mature themes. And while you might initially think that is the kind of adult content category of tabletop role-playing games and the horror stories that go along with that, we're going to try and perhaps not put up a defense of those certain unappealing aspects, but the benefits you can have about including mature content and why people are often drawn to try and include it, even though it is perceived or lands poorly. So that will be what we are throwing the ball back and forth on today. So,
yeah, a rated R campaign, or up to and including R, I guess we should say. And I don't. I want to acknowledge, I guess, here at the beginning that this is something that makes up the most common complaint, or that I think I see online, people talking about mature content or adult content that is being attempted by the DM that is not going over.
Yeah, or is like way out of left field, or feels like it's like being forced in.
So. Yeah, usually because the DM is doing it badly, or is forcing it, does not have the trust or the understanding with the group to pull it off. And I don't think so. We may do a video about how to include it, but all I really wanted to talk about this time was sort of why people keep trying to include it. And like you said in the intro, why it's potentially a good thing. And I guess just to hit the ground running, like I think first and foremost, it brings depth. Like it brings dimension to what is happening in your campaign. It's one of my very favorite words, both in this hobby and in general, is verisimilitude. And this is one of the things that can add that to your campaign world, is this grounding of your otherwise fantastic landscape in some real stakes that people can understand. I've got a speech ready, so if you've got a comment.
Yeah, well, I think the meat of the conversation boils down to try and put out the most believable setting, or to try and immerse your players, your group, in a world that seems as alive as possible. I think it is a very helpful tool to show both the highs and lows of your world. And this doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go to the extremes on either side. Like, a lot of times when we get towards those extremes, or where the party is not comfortable, there's fade to blacks, or there is brief descriptions, or there's kind of reference to it in a more passing way. But if you bring your players into a variety of situations or emotions or environments or things of that nature, I think it only serves to help highlight what they might be really interested in, or what they might be afraid of, or what they might get, bought in with or immersed in, and all that good fun words or buzzwords you want to throw around. So I think that's what it comes down to, is to have the good, you need the bad, even though that's not potentially the correct words to use in this scenario. So.
And I think, again, bad that people can understand. I skipped Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame in theaters. I skipped them. And I'm a fan. Like I saw all the Iron Man movies in theaters. I followed the MCU, but I knew that I was going to be disappointed in those last two movies. And so I didn't watch them in theaters. And it was years later, it's actually this year, that I went back on Disney Plus to watch them, just to see what happened. And spoilers ahead, in those movies, literally, and I mean the word literally, half of all life in the universe is at stake.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about it at all, the bad guy's plan, the bad guy's method, what is at stake in what is happening in that plot, if you think about it at all, it immediately unravels, it immediately falls apart. The bad guy's plan is dumb. It doesn't make any sense. Uh
Welcome to the
and I'm
impromptu review of Endgame.
I mean, I'm stopping short of like actually tearing apart plot points because that could be a video of its own. It's just a deeply stupid movie,
Mm-hmm.
um, a deeply stupid pair of movies. Uh, and one of the reasons is because the stakes being half of all life in the universe, it's they're so high as to be absurd. The stakes are absurd. They're so big that they're meaningless.
Mm-hmm.
Um, which is, I think, why the movie works so hard to make you care about what's going on with Iron Man, because you need something to care about.
Can I interject? Because I actually have an interesting observation, I think.
Yeah,
So, I think a really cool thing to highlight, and this is in an attempt to try and categorize what we're talking about with mature content, where it's not just, girls half naked dancing around in a brothel or some horrible sexual content that, people don't want to dance around with, using that term twice. But anyway, mature content can mean handling the emotional trauma of half the universe being wiped away or all of your close companions being puffed out of existence, right? But I don't think Endgame has the ability to handle that appropriately, because how on earth, literally, how in the universe do you handle that, losing half of the known world or the known universe, right? But in the same movie, you have Black Widow dying, and it's a very pointed to moment of audience members and fans of like, oh, that was so gripping and insane, and the sacrifice and the emotions and the connection she had with Hawkeye. That's something that a lot of people point to, because I think the film had the ability to handle that mature moment, that mature content of that loss and that grief and all the emotions that come with it. And so I think in the same movie you can kind of see the difference of the ability or the correct way of handling something like that, and why it can be really good and really bad depending on how you actually put it in.
that example shows us why it can be beneficial, why it can be important to include this um, kind of touchy or more touchy material. Is it gives the players something they can relate to, relatable stakes. Black Widow dying is relatable, because the audience has been with this character over several movies and cares presumably about her.
And they've also probably lost a loved one, so they know they can kind of almost transplant those emotions onto the scenario.
So we we know we all have known, or we know someone who've known. I would venture to say that there's not more than a couple of degrees of separation. Uh, everyone knows that person, that domestic abuser, that you think to yourself, gosh, I really just want to take a bat to that person. I wish that I could descend through the ceiling like Batman and just lay down a beat down, because gosh, do they have it coming.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody has had that at some point in time, I believe. And so in the course of a campaign, you have that opportunity. right? You know what that situation means if the DM presents it and presents it, in a half decent way, and your character can do that.
Mm-hmm.
Your character is in a position to do something about it, and that is something that a player be can find thrilling,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I don't want to make light. Listen, all of these issues, okay, and we may as well compile a short list here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Domestic violence, and abuse, racism, uh,
Genocides, warfare, like
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. War
yeah.
is a big one. War is a
Mm-hmm.
huge one. Torture,
Mm-hmm.
like this is what we mean, and I don't want to make light out of any of them,
Mm-hmm.
right? In no way. Just like how religion in D&D does not reflect my actual spirituality. Anything that takes place in the campaign, does not reflect my feelings. Like I wouldn't add a domestic abuser bad guy to the campaign because I think domestic violence is cool.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You understand what I'm saying here?
Mm-hmm.
I know that you do. Do you understand what I'm saying? So this it's not intended to make light of these things. I know that because we're playing a game, it it hey, because we're playing a game, when you start to use these words in the same breath as game,
Mm-hmm.
it it can feel a little weird. But we're talking about narrative. We're talking about story.
Mm-hmm.
And these are elements that are in so much of our media, and yeah, and because they are human struggles.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's something
So
that someone deals with on a somewhat regular basis somewhere. And so at
right,
some point it has been worked into a narrative or a story or some piece of media that has now been put in society because we want to experience these things, understand these things, explore those emotions, and have a better understanding of the human race, I suppose, to get really deep and artsy fartsy with it. Like, that's what I think the whole reason of people consuming stories is. And so D&D is just another avenue of that with a very interesting twist with your direct interaction with it.
those are that there are two sides of that coin that you just mentioned that make it, again, just add that texture, add that flavor, add a layer that's going to make the campaign unforgettable. Is um we can immediately relate and understand these situations and these stakes, and dealing with them as our characters can be cathartic on the one hand, um meaning you can sort of work out some negative feelings that you have by smiting the domestic abuser.
Mm-hmm.
um
I'd also pose it's a slightly slippery slope. That might be one of the pitfalls that DMs fall into, is using their game as a way of venting some of their frustrations in an unhealthy way. So while D&D, the vast majority of people, I believe, play it as a bit of escapism, fantasy, getting in a different headspace, exploring a different world, escaping reality, you also have to make sure that you're not then confronting the players with the reality they're trying to escape or in a way that they don't want to interact with. That's a little TLDR. And one thing I think we probably should have thrown out at the beginning, is we're not advocating that every game needs this, or that every group needs this, or this is right for every situation, or that this is better than any other style of play. If there's a, beer and chip game where you're sitting around and shooting the shit and hanging out with your buds, it's going to be really difficult to throw some darker, more serious themes in there. Or if you're playing this sci-fi, fantasy, spaceship, goofy, wacky, alternate universe setting where it's all flub aliens and the Googons and all that kind of stuff. Also going to be somewhat difficult to include serious tones in that setting. So all of this has that general broad stroke of like has to be done appropriately and has to be planted in the right fertile soil, I suppose.
Yeah, there's again this discussion is not a how to.
Mm-hmm.
It's more just a why would you?
Yeah, I just don't want to come across as this like you guys aren't
No,
playing D&D right unless you include all this. I mean, come on, man.
no, not at all, not at all.
Yeah.
This is, that we're in a particular place. We're in a particular aisle of the bookstore
Mm-hmm.
right now. This is not an endorsement for everybody to try it or
No.
that everybody even should try it. It's
If you're not
you know,
torturing children, are you even playing D&D? Come on.
these themes are probably not for beginners on
Mm-hmm.
either side of the screen,
Mm-hmm.
and need to be approached with some finesse and care
Mm-hmm.
and consent. Let's say it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think
You
this
know,
is when we do the communication. We should have like a graphic, like little
Mhm.
imagination rainbow. Um,
Yeah.
that's always a foundation or a staple. Again, we don't want to slip into the territory of explaining how to do this, but if you are doing mature content or touching upon these things, we touched upon it briefly in our last episode of different systems of X cards and safe words and all that stuff. But communication is key. Getting feedback from your players is key. Trust is the most important aspect of knowing your group is solid and is there to either correct, accept, or adjust anything you hand them. All that stuff, just to get that out of the way as we continue to throw more and more. uh, what's the word
But
I'm looking for? Yeah.
the other side of that coin, getting back to,
Mm-hmm.
so we've got catharsis on the one hand, and on the other hand is something that that Sarah, my wife, mentioned that I thought was also a really good point, which is that if it's done decently, if it's done reasonably well, then it can be a way to think about something that you never had to think about before.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of expand your mind a little bit. The example that she gave was that if you are from a background where you have never had to worry about going hungry or homeless, let's say, then you can, um, be either in those shoes in this safe, space of a game table, or meet a central character in the campaign that has had to deal with those problems.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, I think that we are we're stepping on someone's toes. Like I've just begun to see examples of people talking about like, oh yeah, I use D&D as a teaching tool for these kids in school, or I use
Mm-hmm.
D&D as a therapy tool, or try to get it going on in prisons. Like, um it's not just because it's fun.
Mm-hmm.
It can potentially be, a a way to venture into a topic that you hadn't considered that deeply, with some bumpers in place.
Mm. Now, I mean,
Um,
the first response to that is a lot of people are going to say, like, oh, how can you possibly try and relate with the struggles of something that you know nothing about and you're trying to pay homage to it in this fake game and, coming down with this, privilege and whatnot. And I could understand that perception, but we're not, I guess, trying to say that that is a replacement or a way to really go through these struggles that people are going through. It's to try and sympathize or understand or empathize with that whatever that amalgamous thing is, the blob of whatever situation you're approaching. Um, it's not doing it a replacement of it. It's just a way of interacting with it in a way that isn't detrimental to anybody.
yeah, and to reiterate, it's not about making light.
Hmm.
It's not about making fun of real people in real
Hmm.
situations. It's As an aside, something that I think is really important as a society, as a people, um, as a society who deals with all the issues that we've talked about and more every single day, is permission to be in good faith wrong, dumb, ignorant, dopey, goofy, what have you, because that is an unavoidable step in having your mind expanded. And that's not to say, we all know that there are people who will feign these things not in good faith, or who are willfully ignorant and enjoy being ignorant and refuse not to be. But my wish is that those people don't blind us to those who just need their mind opened a crack, genuinely. And I think that is, I mean, that's how people grow. And so that's sort of the category that I would place this in when I'm saying that this is a potential upside to this kind of content in your campaign, is if it gets you just to think about something or consider something that you never have before, then that's a good thing. That is adding, that's a net plus.
There's a quote that my friend said to me a long time ago, an old friend of mine. I don't know if he stole it from somewhere else or where it originally comes from, but he told me that one of the main goals or one of the main purposes or things that he seeks whenever he's reading a book or watching a movie or consuming a TV show is he wants to come away with it knowing more about himself or understanding himself better. And I really enjoy that idea or that sentiment, and like thinking about that quite a bit, because I find myself doing that. I think everyone does that whenever you watch a show or watch a movie or play D&D or read a book, as stated. You put it down or you walk away from it, or you turn your phone off and you think about it, whether it's, oh, that movie was awful and this thing and that thing, and you're picking apart the pieces of why it didn't fit, which again probably helps you identify something about yourself, or there's some really strong emotional through line throughout this story that you sit with for a while, that you mull over, that when you're sitting in the shower and you ask yourself, why am I still thinking about this? Or why was that so like in my mind? Why is it stuck now? And I think that really applies to the conversation we're having. It is a cool and unique thing in D&D to have that somewhat direct interaction with a story that can make you ask those questions and analyze yourself and have these deeper thoughts and feel a bit more, I don't know, confident in knowing who you are and what you like and what you don't like. And it's a really strange scenario or privilege to have, I suppose, is the right way to put it. But again, it has to be done well, and when it is, it's something we always come back to. That's originally why we started talking about this in the previous episode, is some of our favorite moments, is some of our more emotionally driven or mature or dark or angry bits in our campaign that have now really struck a chord and now reside in our heads more often than not. So that's my little end cap. Yeah.
The reason why is not because they were dark and edgy and we thought that was cool.
Yeah.
It's because they felt real. It felt like, for whatever fraction of a second, we were tricked our brains into the emotions that these are real people. This is a real argument. And that's why it's so memorable.
So I think the second half that I kind of want to tackle, that we kind of danced around and dipped into and out of a couple times, is why it's so prevalent to see horror stories about these things and why it's handled so incorrectly a lot of the time. Or maybe It's the fact that it isn't handled incorrectly a lot of the time, but when it is handled incorrectly, it's so bombastic that it sticks out there like a sore thumb. And what I think it really boils down to is you either have someone who is deeply out of touch with their group and how appropriate whatever they're including is, or you have someone who is so opposed to interacting with any of this stuff that as soon as they touch it, it's a major thing for them. And neither party, I suppose, is wrong in any way, but that has to
I'm,
be expressed or understood to some extent.
I'm
And
gonna
that's
add a third one. I'm gonna add a third one to that list, which is they're trying to force it and include it for the wrong reasons
mm-hmm.
or for bad faith reasons.
Well, yeah, that's what I would kind of categorize as like out of touch. Like either they are fully unaware and they're unintentionally including something that is problematic, or they're so out of touch that they are just ramrodding something in there without any concern of what it's going to do to the players or how they're going to react. And both of them are bad, but I would say the person trying to force it is probably a little bit on the uglier side in that category.
That is, yeah, that's territory of I don't want to play with this person
Mm-hmm.
again.
Yeah, I mean, one of the
Uh,
essential caveats is like you can 100% take this too far, and no one is under any sort of obligation to like man up and deal with it or not be a pansy. Like, I imagine that will be thrown around when people bring up things they don't want to touch on or they don't want to deal with. Um, but there is also the other side of if you don't make that clear, this again is a whole thing about communication and session zero and all that stuff. Don't be surprised when that comes up, or try to approach that respectfully versus making a big thing out of it. It is responsibility on both sides to handle the situation appropriately, but it is understandably difficult when emotional things like this, because they're supposed to evoke very powerful emotions, cause you to react in a less than pleasant way, I suppose. So that's why I think we hear so many stories about it, and why it happens so often, or why we, see it online all the time, is when it does happen incorrectly, it becomes a big thing, and then it's a story, and then everyone likes a good story. Everyone likes to hear about that guy, or that neckbeard DM, or that weirdo who stalked me home. Like, everyone clicks on those and likes to read them, and whether or not they're accurate is a whole other thing.
it the it's almost funny because everybody likes those stories because they're meta stories about this mature content. It gets people's attention
Yeah, yeah.
in any
Mhm,
in almost any form.
mhm,
Um, but I don't think I really have anything else to add. I
mhm.
know that this is one of those topics in particular that I know sometime tomorrow I'm gonna
You're
think
gonna
of
think of
like,
something. Yep.
oh man, I wish I'd worked that in. But
Mhm.
um, we're also at the point where I'm gonna start repeating myself. So
Yeah. My
um,
last little banner thing to throw out there. There is a preemptive warning to DMs, and I assume this is mostly a DM problem, but I could also see this translating to the player side as well. Be prepared to be disappointed. It's a weird thing to suggest or a weird thing to warn you about, but something that I have found myself struggling with off and on is you might think some big thing is coming up or some big event is coming or some event that has occurred is going to be a more impactful or larger, more meaningful experience of the party. And then when everything kind of settles and the actual communication occurs or the fallout of whatever event happens, their reaction is like, oh, that's over. There's that weird conflict that you have inside of you of like, ooh, did I fuck up? Did they fuck up? Did I miss something? Did I like is there something wrong? Like I must have done something wrong. Like so if you're ever putting a lot of emphasis or weight on something, especially in this very emotionally driven spectrum that we're talking about, try not to get too personally invested in those things just in case they don't pan out the way you want. That's kind of a golden rule for DMing in general, is never be too attached to anything, but again, when emotions are involved, it's difficult. So that would be my last little. Again, we don't want to talk about how to include it or the best way to include it, but if you are, keep that in mind.
And as far as end caps go, I guess I'll close by saying that again, this is not. Don't take this as an endorsement, and this is also not intended as commentary on any of these issues that fall into this category.
The video is supposed to
I'm
make you think, much like the purpose of the topic.
yeah. And if you are just not interested as a player
That's all
or
right.
as a DM, but particularly as a player, since you don't know where the campaign's going all the time. If you just don't want to see it, then more power to you. This is also not a criticism of you. That is 100% okay. Because at the end of the day, it is supposed to be a fun game. So, that's not what this video is either.
Yeah, we're not trying to
And
convert you. We're just throwing thoughts out there.
it was just a thought-provoking topic that we thought of last episode. And speaking of repeating myself, like and subscribe.
There we go. That was smooth. That was smoother than most.
And I honestly, like, this is a little bit more of a serious discussion, and so I'll take this moment to say, like, we're doing this because we care about the hobby. We care about narrative and story and being better authors, for lack of a better word. And so I don't ask every video for the likes and the subscribes and the comments because that's what another YouTube video said to do. It is meaningful to us both to see that. So I appreciate it. Thanks. I know Nathan appreciates it.
As always.
Yeah. And let us know how we enraged you in the comments. And I will cringe and shrink into my my blankets over having had the audacity to talk about these hot button issues in any way on the internet.
Or perhaps share a time or a memory that you have of something along these lines, a very impactful moment that you had in your game that's outside the spectrum of your kind of normal D&D. I did a bunch of damage and killed the DM's main villain in one round.
So bring it back next week. I don't know what we're going to be talking about yet, but we're not going to be talking about how to include mature content. Don't look for that next week. That's not going to be the next one in the series. Down the road, maybe. No promises.
That's all I got.
So bring it back here, and until next time.
Have a good one.